Next podcast with Chris and Todd.
All right, hey, welcome back. Todd's stretching, getting ready for the next
go.
podcast. Don't want to pull any hammies or any obliques or anything like that while we're podcasting today.
Always working out during the
that's
podcast.
That's right, man. Working it well. So, hey, welcome to the next podcast. Hey, we got some spiffy next podcast mugs. We'll have to talk to the one and only Milton to see if we can get kind of figured out. Somebody can get maybe. You know what? I don't think anybody's going to want a mug, but if they want a mug, we don't want to shortchange the people.
Yeah.
And go from there. So we'll see what happens. I don't know. Let's get fired up.
Hey, if we're the only ones that wanted mugs, we win.
Either way,
win-win.
Man, that is a good mug. You know what's nice about these mugs? Look at that. Look at that grip on that sucker. Like that
full
is
fingers,
full-fisted mug. Full-fisted mug.
For those of you looking for that, we got one for you.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard that in a mug. But I have big hands, and it's always weird when you're like, okay, it only fit two fingers in there or one. Yeah. Anyway,
I love that if they're listening and you just raise your hand. I've got big hands.
They're just
if you're listening, he does.
I can only imagine how big Pastor Chris's hands are. They're this big. Anyway,
think of Sasquatch.
Yeah, that's right. There's been a sighting, folks, and it's on the podcast. No, so we just talking about next things in our relationship with Christ, but next things just in life. But I think one of those things that's especially important, I think, is just being intentional, right? And just this idea of intentionality. And you and I were intentional this morning. It was time for podcast stuff, and we got to come here and be intentional with doing a podcast, which we love being able to do. At least I do. I can't speak for Todd, but he did show up today, so that shows me some intentionality.
I do enjoy doing it.
Yes, it's fantastic. So, but just this idea of intentionality, I think there's like this weird balance of we want to be intentional. Sometimes we do it by accident, and sometimes we don't know how to be intentional because maybe it's never been modeled or whatever the case is. But I think there's something really, something cool about intentionality because of what it shows the people that are around you. Like, man, because we've all said it at some point, right? Like they really seem intentional, or that seemed intentional, and that was really cool. And I think it's just one of those things that as we talk about maybe adding something to our toolbox, how do we get out in front of it to be intentional and not feel like we're just playing catch up all the time or whatever the case is?
It's funny with this conversation. I've not always, but there's been a time where I struggled with this conversation because I remember like studying and hearing like good intentions only get you so far.
Yep.
And I also remember Andy Stanley said this, like good intentions won't get you to your destination.
Yeah.
It's direction that gets you there. So then I was like, well, I can have all the intentionality that I desire.
Yeah.
But if it's in the wrong place, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so some of it is learning like, okay, it's got to be first, hey, we got to get the right direction. Because ultimately the analogy went like this, like you could have good intentions of wanting to get to, let's say, California.
Yeah.
But if you hop on the interstate here and go east, you're not going to get there. You have good intentions. Like we're going to make it. This is going to happen. And we're going to drive this many hours.
Yeah.
You're just going in the wrong direction. And so some of this becomes, all right, how do we make sure we have the intentionality in the right areas?
Yeah. Okay. Bless you.
Me.
Wow. No, it's okay. No apology needed.
Well, sneezing in a podcast, always a great idea.
Well, they can't see you, so it doesn't. They're
They
just
hear it.
listening. They hear it. Man, that was a thunderous sneeze. When you said that, it brought so many things to mind, like where intentionality early on in a lot of my areas of life as I grew up lacked, right? Like I was not an intentional student. I was hey, I'll get to it or I'll get by, and I was not an intentional student. Just like I was not an intentional dater. Like, man, I should be more intentional with this. And specifically when I met Rachel, I remember girls going to her and warning her, do not date him. Do not date Chris. He flirts with everybody.
He's a floozy.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't want the other sisters, brothers to think you're a floozy. Anyway, but like really, he's not serious. Like he's not intentional. He won't be I didn't use this language at the time, right? But he won't be intentional with you because he's not serious about, really wanting to date someone, which I was, because one, she loves sports and could talk about basketball, and I was hooked. I literally, before I knew she knew Jesus or anything about her, like
Sports got me.
She was pretty, she had a great laugh, and she knew sports. And those were three things that, man, were right.
Immature Chris was like,
Chris was like, I'm a junior, it's time for a wife. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously though, like, intentionality is not just something that fits one area of our lives. It really is something that, I got to be honest, I wish I would have maybe developed earlier on. I knew about it and I knew what it was to be intentional, but knowing what it is and applying it, two different things.
Right. And I think that's what part is, like, we put intentionality and good intentions. Well, I want to be a good basketball player. Okay, well, yeah, you got good intentions, but you're not putting the work in.
You're not being intentional
The
with
work is the intentionality part.
Uh-huh.
And so, hey, I want to be finding the right, kind of spouse. Okay, well, then what kind of values are you looking for? Who are you becoming? Like, that's the work you got to put in. I want to be a good parent for my kid. And, I try to pick them up at the right time, like basic things. That's not really intentionality. That's just common sense.
Yes.
Intentionality would be like, no, what books do I want them to know before they leave the house? What things do I want them? What important lessons do I want them to know? Then you got to go, what work am I going to do to put that in?
Yeah.
So I had to learn good intentions and intentionality are not the same thing.
No,
but they
agree.
sound similar.
They do.
And so intentionality to me is the work that actually leads to the outcome that you want.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say you want, but maybe God is desiring in some of this. And maybe you want it too. Hopefully.
No, I think you do. I think you have to want it to some degree, right? Like, because that's a conversation of parents nowadays. Like, well, I want good intentions for my kids, and they just assume that's going to come with intentionality. No, listen, and kids have to want it, but on the reverse side of it, as a guy, and wanting to be intentional with things like I want a good marriage. Okay. So then if you sit down and have those conversations, what things do I need to do to be intentional? What are markings of intentionality when it comes to being a husband? What are the markings of intentionality when it comes to being a parent? What are the markings of intentionality when it comes to be a Christ follower? Mm-hmm. I mean, there has to be markings that they'll look at and say, man, I love that about you. You're really intentional. And because you and I both know there are fruits of intentionality, right? Like when we're intentional and we dive into something and people, it should be seen, hopefully. I mean, that, man, your intentions are really getting somewhere, at least you hope, right? And
what would you say are the key things that help you, like, be intentional in a healthy way? I mean, I have some thoughts on it. I can give you a little time.
Yeah.
But for me, I go, if I was going to put like a formula together, I think it's you got to know what values you're going after.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're going to try to be intentional about everything. And that means you're going to be intentional about nothing.
Yep.
So what are the things? Because at some point you're going to have to, the value is going to be, I value this, so I can't say this is valuable too.
Yep.
Like,
which is an oxymoron, right? Like, I got to say no to something to be intentional. Yeah, you do.
You do, because it's going, all right, if you want to be a good parent, but you are working ridiculous amount of hours and never home, both things cannot be true.
Yeah.
Because I go, well, you value your work over being home with your kids. Like, that is just reality. So that's the part you've got to pick the values that you want to be intentional about. Yeah. And I would say that's the part where you go, I hope that God gets to lead that in your life.
Yeah.
Because that's where I think we can get it wrong. Where it's like, well, I value all these things. And God's like, that's not the best.
Yeah.
Or I'd say, hey, we want a great relationship with God. We value that. But we spend the rest of our day not making anything for him. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I'd go, you got to know values. Then the second part of it is, you got to put time to it.
Yep. That would definitely be one of my
time. Think of that will start to equal, here's the things you are actually intentional about.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you could do that formula different. Intentionality plus time will equal your value.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, I just think consistency too. Like, how consistent are you being in those things? I would say time is definitely one of those. Are you marking out time? And you go back to something you
consistency is a good one.
Something you just said ago, like, there's been in the past, there's been different markings of value of family, right? Like, sometimes it get muddied that, I'm working hard so I can provide for my family. And I do these things because I'm taking care of my family. Well, that's great, but then you have to have the conversation of what do we need? Like, do we need this? And can we be okay without this? And intentionality isn't just doing a job. It's like one day, like, because we know it now, like one day kids are going to leave your house. What do you want them to know before they leave? Like that you were a hard worker? Great. But
that does not mean also
No.
you put your spouse on the back burner when you have kids.
All.
Like, because I'm like, that could be the case. Like, well, we got to get all of our kids ready so that when they're out of the house, it's 18.
Yeah.
Well, then you have years left of your life and your spouse has been forgotten about for how many years?
That's one of the things I love being intentional about. Like, like when we could get babysitters, like you were in that phase of getting babysitters, right? Like to have a night where you go out with your spouse. Now it's, hey, all our girls are in school. Let's you and I make time at lunch. And so that's been great. I love intentional things, and I know we're maybe not there yet in the conversation, but like I love being intentional with dating my spouse. Like, man, I love one-on-one time with her because the kids are going to leave. And I get her all to myself, which I don't think she's all wrapped her mind around, like all of Chris, no kids. What does that look like? Maybe that's scary. I don't know. But no, I agree. You don't. And I think that's it. I think we try to course correct often, right? In those senses, like, oh man, I've been neglecting this, so I better be intentional now. And then, it really is finding consistency in time and value. Like, how do you spread the wealth? How do you just find those rhythms that are going to work for you so that you are making those moments of value really stick and grow and become something that you want them to be?
I know for you, I was going to ask you, like, how have you navigated that? Because, I mean, you could sit in this conversation and go, yeah, intentionality is great, but, like, you can be intentional about everything. So how do you know which things to choose, what things not to choose, and how do you say no to good things?
Yeah.
So how have you navigated that of just being able to go, okay, no, I'm going to be intentional in this. I'm in this season of my life.
Yeah.
This is where I need to be intentional.
Well, I mean, as growing in my relationship with Christ, I think that's one of the most things that I value so heavily. And so I've got to get up in the morning before my girls are up and before the chaos of the day starts, right? And you and I have had conversations about this, like whether it's at night or whatever works best, but I value just time to be quiet, which is odd for me because I'm not a quiet guy. And I'm not like, when people talk about solitude and quiet, I'm like, I'm not talking about that, But I really have had to develop and be intentional about getting up earlier and earlier and I told somebody this morning, I've been having that conversation more where I feel God impressing on me, like, I think you need to get up just a little bit earlier. And like, man, I don't like that conversation because I do enjoy getting my sleep, but it really is. I want to value that time in God's word. I want to value and be intentional with having it so he can speak to me. I can listen to him. And maybe that's part of it, the just listening to him more and spending time in prayer for my family and for the people, and being intentional to do that, intentional to date my spouse, man, I want to invest in that relationship because I need it. She needs it. And God pretty much told me I better take care of my spouse like he's took care of the church, right? So I've got to love her like Christ loved the church. And then my kids, I'm so grateful to be a dad. I'm so grateful for that opportunity. I know not everybody gets that opportunity, but where do we invest and why do we invest? How do we be intentional with one-on-one time? If you don't have one-on-one time with your kids, man, find time to get one-on-one time with those kids. Be intentional with that. And it doesn't have to be like all day, right? Like, hey, we spend all day together. No, go get chicken strips at the Big D, okay? Like, get fired up about chicken strips. It's awesome. Or find things that they love. One of my girls loves the Quarter Arcade, and we just spend time wasting money at that Quarter Arcade, whatever. But and others it's food, and those are the things. I mean, those are in front of me, and those are the things God has, I believe, called me to be intentional with. So yeah,
I think the other part is I think a critical piece of this would be looking at how you spend your time.
Mm-hmm.
So I would. Just like you do a budget for finances, I don't think it's bad to do a budget for your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of going, hey, where am I putting all the time? And as the seasons change, you do this. But the caveat to that is just because you spend the most time, let's say at work, does not mean that is the top.
Yeah, absolutely.
Priority.
Yeah.
Because, we can't spend, like, kids are at school, you're at work. That doesn't mean like, oh, I must value work more than my kids.
Yeah.
No. we have a mission that God has for us, and part of that is doing the work. But it's looking at like, wait, how much time did I give my kids this week? And so it's figuring out like, no, what is it that's healthy? Do I need to give them, 2 to 3 hours, intentional time each kid, or we need to sit down and have meals together as a family. Like those become things that you start to go, am I doing that in the week? I know one thing that I've been processing, and I'm more keep it in my head. I probably need to write it down. But it's just kind of the irreducible minimums. Those are things like, these are things I must do. That tells me I need this to keep my relationship strong with God. I need this to keep my relationship strong with Tina and my kids. But also on top of that, it helps me do the work that I have done. And friendships that fall into that as well. And so that I'm looking at a week and looking at a month and looking at a year and going, okay, am I accomplishing the values and putting the time into those things that God would go, yes, yes, yes. And there's been weeks, even this week, it feels, I was like, I'm off because all the other things have been busy, but God has not gotten the time at the beginning. And so I can tell, I'm like, I don't love this. It's just been a week that you just feel like you're off. Yeah, because things like that, you find those rhythms. And then you mentioned it quickly, just opportunities come your way and there are some things you want to say yes to and some things you have to say no to. And I know you've had some things come up like, hey, could I be involved in that? Or could I not be involved in that? And having to wrestle with, does that fit into the things I want to be intentional about? Yeah. If you say yes to everything, you're going to go like, I'm not doing anything well. Yeah. And so that's the danger in this conversation is intentionality helps you move from doing just a bunch of good things to doing a great thing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and even when life is crazy, like right now, life is crazy for us. Like one night, last week we have something every day from Sunday to Sunday. And somebody was like, oh, this is crazy. Yeah, but I still have time in the morning. I still had a moment where I stole away with two of the, even though there are busy moments, that intentionality saves us and keeps us kind of honed in those moments, I think are good. But because I would also say, like, stop saying you don't have enough time. Yeah. Because God's given you the time that you need. Mm-hmm. And he's given everybody the same amount of time. Same amount of time. And so some of it is going, the reason we may not have time is one, we're too busy. Yeah. So it limits ourselves to being intentional at all. Yeah. And so we work through that, and you're going to make mistakes on it. Like, oh, I said yes to this. I'm not going to do that again. Yeah. I shouldn't have done that. Yeah. Other things where you're like, man, I'd normally love to be, for me, like even this semester, like normally I'd be like, I'm leading another group along with my prayer group. This semester, I'm like, I don't know if I should. Yeah. Like there's just seasons where you go like, no, this doesn't seem like the right time. Because if I try to add that, there's just already so many things. Absolutely. But then I'm also debating like, they need help coaching at my daughter's school. And I'm like, all right, well, that is a commitment. Like in the afternoon, from this time to this time, can I get that in? Yeah. And so that's where I feel like if God's saying, hey, I want you to do this coaching, well, then maybe the season before I'm going, I can't do all of that, and then jump into another season where I'm running more and more. And so those are things you just got to pay attention to and recognize when it's off. You're just got to learn from some of that. Your seasons where you're like, oh, I thought I could do this. Nah, I need to take a little slice of humble pie and recognize, I think I may have chewed off more than I can handle. Yeah, and I appreciate that. Like even having moments where you sit with your wife and like, hey, do you remember what happened when you did say yes to that last time? And and are you willing to hear those things? Because, sometimes intentionality just, it always feels good in the moment, but then you get done and you're like, that wasn't good. That wasn't a good use. One of the things I thought about too is, would you equate spontaneity as a part of intentionality? Does that make sense? Like, I think part of intentionality for me is being spontaneous in moments. I think intentionality allows you to be creative in those moments to where some of it is being intentional with rest, being intentional with, well, do I have time to be able to, if God were to go, hey, go do this right now. Yeah. I can. Yeah. So I think if you're not intentional, then you have and you're getting demands from everywhere. It's going to be hard to be like, oh yeah, I've got time to do that. Yeah. So or to be spontaneous. Yeah. Or to do something. Oh, you know what? Yeah, I can do that. Like I've got time. Well, and it does. I think it's a good conversation to have in those moments too of going,
okay, what I'm doing right now, I know I need to be intentional and get the things done I need to get done, but putting too much weight on certain things in those moments, like, oh, I've got it. No, hold on. I think if I want to be open to maybe something that I feel led to do, or just I need to make it part of my life, I need to be intentional to say yes and realize I can come back to this.
I coach this in the couples, and I think it plays into our relationship with God too. You've got a mechanical side to your relationships that are, this is the consistent connection points. Like you think your spouse, like you probably need 20 minutes a day just to decompress about the day or just connect about life.
Yep.
Same thing, I think, with your kids. You need to sit at a table and connect for 20, 30 minutes, if not an hour of dinner.
Yeah.
Those kind of connection points. And it's mechanical. We're going to do this over and over and over. There's times where our kids are like, I don't want to sit at the table. No, you will sit at this table.
Yeah.
But the danger, and then the other side of it is a mysterious side to where this has got like, hey, date nights are kind of the mysterious, and going on vacations, that's got a mysterious side. You're doing something outside of the norm or the mechanical side of it. And both of those got to be blended together, like to make a good connection. Because if there was a table that represented just your connection with people, if you're just mechanical, people are like, I enjoy sitting at this table, but it's boring.
Yeah.
It is not. I can almost predict what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And so some of you are going to be more on that. I love my rhythms. I love the mechanical side.
Yep.
Almost to a.
We are definitely wired that way.
And it could be. You're like, when's the last time we did something out of the norm that created the spontaneous? We're in an environment we don't know. We're doing something new.
Yep.
And then the mysterious side, if it was just mysterious, problem would be like, I like this table too. However, I don't know when you're going to be here.
Yeah. There aren't things.
They're so random, and it's so like.
What can I count on?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so
what can I count
that's
on?
the thing is like at this table, people are like, I want both. I want to be able to count on you. That's the mechanical side. But I also want to be able to like, we have some times that are just unique and random. So that's why my long answer, but yes.
Yeah.
Intentionality gives you the ability to do both.
Because I think, there definitely are individuals in relationships that need certainty, right? And so it just, spontaneity feels like chaos sometimes to certain people and to certain personalities. And you just.
And this won't make any sense to some people, but you got to schedule spontaneous moments.
Yes, you do.
Like you got to schedule dates. You've got to schedule vacations. And that's like, that doesn't feel like spontaneous. But that's what you're creating is moments to where you're going, you have to plan out vacations, but you're like, we're going to drive. We're going to see how this goes. And that's the spontaneous part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about just because I love spontaneity and just like, man, I spent a lot of money taking sweets to the wife at work, like, oh man, I probably should do something different.
There's a budget line item.
That's right. Budget line item.
Stronger.
And I'm developing this pattern of only taking sweet things. So like, but don't bring me hummus and chips. Like what, anyway. But I appreciate that aspect of like those drawing those lines and those balances, right? Like it's kind of like the idea of like never going home the same way. Like, well, why aren't we going this way? Why are we driving here? And your kids are asking. I think you have the ability to develop things in your kids that don't have to be huge, right? Like you don't have to like go and take your kids out of school and just say, hey, we're taking a self-care day, whatever, which can be fun and important. Like if you need that you've been running hard and you need a moment to breathe. But I think there are some beauties like you're talking about in structure of saying, okay, these are the things we do when we're at the table, or these are the things that we do when we're together, and that they can bank on, because I think those just bring some good framework for us to be intentional with, because there are moments in life where we need to stop and to be intentional. I think about like, Remember the Titans, where one of the coaches walks in and after Gary has the accident, he's like, I think this is a good time for prayer and reflection. And Gary looks at him like, Coach, I'm hurt. I'm not dead. Like I appreciate you trying to be intentional with this right now. But man, we got bigger things to talk about, what I think, and reading the room and knowing the season, and not that those things are bad. Like there are times and moments for that, but keeping an open mind to the perspective of, okay, we can be intentional about that, but man, we'd still keep what's in front of us because it's important for us to focus in on. So
I feel like you're better at being intentional with some of that mysterious stuff, partly because you love giving gifts, but also just, hey, love doing that. Yeah. Once I figure out like, here's our rhythm.
Yeah.
I lock it in. Not always the best at
Yeah.
like, all right. And I'm trying to get better because I even feel like God, hey, how about you go do this today? And I'm like,
Yeah.
but I have all these
Yeah.
things to
Yeah.
do. I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah.
And so, and I was like, wait, hold on. Like, I need to be able to have,
Yeah.
and some of it is learning to have flexibility and margin, but also
Yeah.
being okay with, okay, let it happen.
Yep. And I would say, I mean, Rachel and I think Rachel and I know Rachel and I compliment each other because she is like that. She's like, she'll ask the tough questions of me. Like, yeah, that would be great to do, Chris. But I feel like we need to do this right now. And we have been going strong. So we need to be intentional. One of us needs to be home. As great as it would be to go on another date night, Chris, we need to be at home tonight.
Someone needs to
Yes.
be holding the fort down.
And Rachel,
And not
yeah.
our 7th grader.
Yes,
So,
I would agree. And but no, it's good that God compliments you with those people in your life that help you realize those things. And yeah, to be intentional is a beautiful thing. So, but man, I feel like we just kind of cracked the surface of this. I feel like there are a lot of things we could talk
there's
about.
a lot of
you know?
layers to intentionality.
Yeah, it really is. Like, I mean, and we won't go into it, but like for me right now, like intentionality of like a girl graduating from college.
Yeah.
Oh man, you know what do you want your kids to know when they leave your house? What do you want your kids, you know? And,
Well, that's because intentionality is in part of like every relationship,
Yep,
every kind
absolutely.
of dynamic you walk through. And so learning how to do it in a way that's like, okay, and adjust and adapt.
Yep.
It's a huge part of it.
Yep. Well, hopefully this has been a good conversation for you. Obviously, yeah, there's a lot more we could probably say, but just want to begin to crack the surface of this. And I appreciate just Todd's insight and wisdom on some of those things that are really good. And hopefully it provided you with maybe a platform to begin having a conversation. Things are just falling apart in the studio here.
Yes.
No, but I hope you have a great day and I hope it goes well. And we'll see you next time.